Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome once again to the Justice Beat Talk Show. We're back with you for another episode, season 6, episode 4, in which we're going to be speaking with a guest that we're very excited to have today, Miss Ronda Swenson. She is a mitigation specialist, and our guest host for today in terms of interviewing will be Mr. Jack Prubin. He's associate producer and a student at Adler University. We also have joining us today, as usual, our in-house show consultant, clinical show consultant, Karen Sutton, who's a licensed clinical social worker. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. So, as you all know, this season I've been doing a really quick introduction in terms of I'm not centered in the show anymore. I'm allowing all of our social justice practicum students to serve in the role of guest interviewer of all of our guests. I will join back around 10:45 for our Q&A. So I'm going to turn the show over this morning to Mr. Jack Prubin.
Hello. Ronda, how's your morning go so far?
Good. I have this puppy and he might try to, he's really anxious today.
No, it's good to have an extra guest, right? We didn't have to email him. But well, to start off, I just want to say that it's great to have you, first of all, and then to dive right into it. I was curious as I'm kind of looking it up myself over the last couple of days, and I'm sure that a lot of people are familiar with it, but your main occupation is as a mitigation specialist, which will be kind of a main focus of ours today. So I was curious, obviously we'll dive deeper into it. If you could just give a general scheme of exactly what a mitigation specialist is.
So the most general theme is that we're responsible for telling the client's story. So we want to humanize them to the judge, to the district attorney, to a jury, in hopes of mitigating their sentence. We originally started on like death penalty cases, but in California, we have so many options now for resentencing. So we're doing like a lot of what we call Franklin's, which is the parole. So anyone committed a crime under 26 and under. And then we have juvenile transfers that we might do a lot. What's called like 1172, which you can petition the court after 15 years for resentencing. So we're used a lot in that. And then for gun enhancements, gang enhancements, basically anything where like, well, any case really would be useful to tell the client's story, but really where people are looking at like life sentences is where you're used a lot. But that's just the most basic.
No, I appreciate it. And I'm curious, so you kind of said, is it different by state to state? Is California kind of a difficult area to deal with it, or maybe a better one?
California is better because we are recognizing the fact that like childhood trauma, community trauma, all of that matters. And plays a role in like the decisions, the factors of youth matter. So all of that plays an important role in, when someone commits a crime. So California, because of Newsom, is really like on the forefront of making sure that we're looking at the individual and humanizing them, whereas other state, like there's other states where you can still, transfer juveniles to adult court, which we do have that here. But we just passed a law January of this year where the only time that you can transfer a juvenile is if you can show that they're not amenable to rehabilitation, which is huge. So so California is different than most states.
No, that's awesome. And it's great.
But we still have a lot to go. We still have a long ways to go.
We kind of look into that, kind of where that was going to be one of my questions in a little bit, of kind of where this occupation kind of should head to. But I imagine the most difficult part, like you're saying, is kind of to make those childhood traumatic experience a quantifiable thing, right? And to show that, how do you make a story be something that can uphold in court and have actual quantitatable things to it? Is that a challenge that you endure?
So the thing about it is, I would say like, for any other type of case besides death penalty cases, this work is pretty new. So, all public defenders' offices now, alternate defender's office, conflict panels, everybody's using what, we call like forensic social workers, which is like individuals who essentially like, work in like these systems. And so for them, a lot of times they're coming trained and they're very like clinical in their report writing. You know, a lot of offices think that they can only use like licensed clinical social workers to do this, or master's degree social worker people to do it. And, you know, as you guys, like a lot of people know, when you're pursuing that degree, you're trained in a certain way. But the reality is, like with the courts and stuff, like I think for any of us, the more that we hear a person's story, the more we can relate to them. So for me, like I'm coming from a sociology background. And so when I write my reports, I really like, I write one report that's like, you know, the report about breaking down the story. And then I do what I call like a visual social history. So it's more so like, you know, pictures of the families and like linking, like showing places, showing, you know, racial justice issues that like were going on during the time. So I think that it's important for like both sides. Like, yeah, you have to bring in like all the trauma and stuff, but you also want to really just like highlight so much of like the person's life that I think if you have passion, then I think anybody could do the job. Um,
And so when you're kind of bringing these things to the forefront of looking at whether racial issues in the past, or you know, situational for the person that when they were being raised or whatever it may be, what is that searching process like? Is it, so imagine mainly just a one-on-one conversation, or how, exactly, well, how does that go of finding and digging up those details?
so, you know, like so say for instance, I mean, I know that you guys probably have it, I think like what St. Louis, Missouri and stuff is like really high crime rate and stuff. But like for us, it would say like be like Oakland. So I might bring in like you know, riots that were happening in Oakland at the time, or the gun violence in Oakland, and talk about like the community violence and how that impacts the individual. You know, going back to like the 90s, like the super predator myth. So you would bring in the information about that. Like if you had clients that, you know, in that period of the 90s where we were at the height of the super predator myth, talk about how that impacted the way in which we sentenced, especially young Black children. You know, so for me, like my job is like getting the information from the client, but then also doing a lot of research on my own to see, you know, how intergenerational trauma would impact an individual. Like I have a lot of clients who came here as refugees from Cambodia or Laos. So bringing all that information in to help not just the courts, but I think like a big part of like how I look at my job is to heal the client and bring connecting those dots for them, because they're taught so often, you know, within the systems that like they don't matter, that their story doesn't matter. And so for me, like it's a healing process for them to be like, okay, well, I acted this way, but this is why I acted this way. So yeah, that's a big part of how you bring all of that stuff in, is you're getting the information from the client. They're doing usually a social history and giving you some background, and then you go in and you talk to them about the things that you need to talk to them about. Like, don't re-traumatize. That's a big part of our work, is don't re-traumatize people. Like you don't need to, if they already wrote something down and you don't need that information, don't go in and start digging. Don't go in and start digging with their families, you know, because we're not there to be, I mean, I stay on forever. Like I'm like a lifetime person. So I'm like, I'm gonna follow you until you're like, hey, leave me alone kind of situation. But like we don't, even though like we're therapists in a lot of ways, at the same time, like we don't get to provide that one-on-one therapy. So you really, really want to make sure when you do this work that you're not re-traumatizing people. Only get the information that you need in order to write the best report possible.
Absolutely. And by the way, I was going to say, Karen, if you do have any questions, feel free to quiet me down. But I was going to ask, so, you know, I noticed that, so it looks like you have been kind of working within it. So your legal services since 1999, correct? And then how is these, you know, you said that kind of Gavin Newsom, California is on the forefront of this in general and doing a good job acknowledging there's, you know, places to grow. But I'm curious of how have you seen this industry change, you know, and have you seen more acceptance to it, or when, you know, maybe judges are more open to the idea of it, or whatever it may be? How have you kind of seen that throughout your career?
So I want to say a big part of the change is the fact that we have like so many lifers that are getting out. So the system impacted individuals who are getting out and they're a part of nonprofits, they're starting nonprofits, they're advocating for, change of legislation. Like, to me, that has been the big change. Like, yes, we've had, a governor and senators and all of these people that are like doing this amazing work. But if we didn't have the people who are most impacted by the system, the families trying to change the laws for their loved ones, if we didn't have those nonprofits, community organizations at the forefront of doing this work, our laws wouldn't change. California does still have the death penalty. People think we don't, because there's a moratorium on it, so there's a hold. But at the same time, if we get, it gets close, but it never passes to change the law. So if we get someone in here that is a red state person, then it's gonna stay. And all those people are going to most likely, it's going to pick back up. So, I still have active death penalty cases in California.
And those can just drag on forever kind of thing?
Yeah, death penalty cases drag on forever. I just have a guy that settled, 3 weeks ago now, took a plea after, and he's been in county jail for 11 years.
And so they sit there with that kind of looming over their head, huh?
Yeah, and I guess that kind of like can transition to another point. Like, I don't think people understand the difference between jail and prison. Like, in jail, you're not getting any kind of program. You're not able to work a job. You're essentially in your cell for the most part, 24/7. My client was telling me that in his certain jail, there's just some new legislation that came down where they have to be out for at least 15 hours a week of their cell. So, but what the jail is doing is giving them yard, which is a, concrete, there's stuff over the even ceiling, you can't really see the sky because that's a blocked vision. But so they're uncuffed in that cement yard for 3 hours. And then the other amount of time, they're just handcuffing all these guys to a bench and having them sit out and handing them a tablet. So jail is just, to me, like a whole like different level. Like, at least in prison, people are programming. There's like some visitors, coming in and doing the programs. They are out of their cell. Like, we talk about solitary confinement, but to me, like, people don't think about that jail is solitary confinement. They're not getting out at least 1 hour a day. Sometimes it's like 48 hours before they even go outside. So yeah, death penalty case.
This may be like a very broad question. I'm just curious, what would be, I guess there's no advantage to anybody for that process of having the length and time in jail, correct? Is there any, like, why would that not be a situation that's possibly?
I think so there's like two avenues. So there's the avenue that, like, the court process is so backed up. So attorneys are just continuing. They're waiting for, discovery to come in from the district attorney. They're waiting to review the discovery. The average caseload for, say, like a public defender is like hundreds of cases. So if you have like these serious felonies, you have to kind of put it off so you can review everything. But a lot of the problem is that, like, cases drag on forever because our system is not designed to actually hold trials. There's just no capacity to hold these trials. So it's like, everybody's waiting for, like, essentially the best possible plea. But also, for me, I think jails are designed to get people to take those plea deals, because the jail environment is so bad that it's like, I'm going to take whatever deal you give me to get the heck out of this place. And I don't care if it is, life in prison. I'll take my chances that I'll never get out. I just don't want to be in this place anymore.
Wow. No, I never was quite aware. I think a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but I've learned about the difference between jail and prison, but I did not know about the extent of which a state can be at jail. And then
yeah, honest, like, most of them are getting out, like, especially if you're in there for a serious felony, you're getting out of your cell, like, before that whole 15-hour thing. It was 3 hours a week. So 3 hours a week, and in jail, you don't have a television. They have a television, it might be like on the wall far away. And so you can't even hear it. You've got to stand at the door and watch it. You don't have a radio in there. You can't put pictures of your family on the wall. You're just essentially in this, like, cement box, just waning. And the costs are high. So the cost of phone calls. So in California, we just passed free phone calls for families, but it's only for prison. So the jail calls, it could still be like, $15 for 15 minutes. Commissary, store, whatever you guys call it, is high. It's like triple the price of what it is out here. They don't give you like, if you get soap, like if you can't have any money on your books in order to get like, say, like soap or deodorant or anything like that. And then when you do get that, it's like that little bar of like soap that we all get, like, if you go to a hotel or motel or whatever, that's what you get for like the week to use. So there's just like I said, there's all of this like things that they do that to me is just plain flat out torture in order to get people to take pleas.
And so I'm so curious, and that's one great thing. That was going to be one of my questions, was how much you're actually involved after sentencing or actually in prison and stuff like that. Because, but I was curious of, this is probably a loaded question overall, but you mentioned that you feel as if jail is sometimes designed to make people, hey, I'll just go to prison for so and so. What do you see as that, psychological effect on a lot of your clients?
You see it like after, so like the one thing is like there's a lot of people that do this work, and a lot of them are coming in just like now doing the Franklins, which is what we call the youth offender parole. But like for me, I started out in this field as a criminal defense paralegal on capital cases, on the most severe like gang cases and everything. And so I didn't really transition to doing mitigation type work until like 2006, 2007. And even then we didn't really call it that. It was just like, oh, you know how to do this. Can you write me this report? And you're like, okay, like, sure, But for me, like I already had that background information of like what jail and prison was like. And so for clients, like I've seen like the transition. So I do all kinds of like cases. So I do, before pretrial, I do, guys that have served like 30, 40 years. And so for me, it's, I can see the transition of like the effect that all the different environments have on them when they're transitioning back. Sorry, you have it.
What was that? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, of course. Karen had a great question she'd like to ask you.
Yeah, you just mentioned too, Rhonda. You mentioned again the Franklin hearings, and I just did a little bit of research on that, and I also saw something that said that these were only applicable for controlling offenses. Could you sort of elaborate on that and explain that more for our audience so they fully understand what a Franklin hearing is, and then what a controlling offense is, and why those are the only ones that are considered?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there is a little bit of like loopholes with like California. So like, for instance, like we just had where like, okay, so the Franklin is for, I think in a lot of states, they have them like 21 and under. Some states have it for people 23 and under. And then ours, I think California is the only one that looks at individuals who committed their crime 26 and under. And so what the Franklin does is it allows for anyone 26 and under to submit to the courts mitigating evidence that is then provided to the parole board for their Franklin hearing. So what happens is if you can go to a board for YOP at 15, 20, or 25, depending upon what your sentence is. And so those individuals like get this Franklin packet. Sometimes like we get these cases and we work on them for years. Sometimes we might have a quick turnaround because, the client didn't even know that they were eligible for one. So Franklins have been around essentially like this individual, Frank, his last name is Franklin, petitioned the court for like this purpose. And so when Franklin's originally started, it used to reopen the case. And so once a case is reopened, then that gives you the benefits of all the new laws. But I think the courts were like a little bit like, oh no, we can't do that. We have too many of these people. So then it was like, okay, well, there's supposed to be a hearing, but there's not a hearing. Like there's a hearing, but essentially all we do is submit this report. It goes into the court file, which then goes into the individual's C file for prison. And then that gives the parole board the opportunity to review this mitigating evidence. Some individuals, when they do this work, so I like to do it where I submit my report to the courts and everyone after I have seen the psych report from the prison. There are some individuals that like to forefront that and submit their report so that the psych person from the prison sees their report when they write. I personally don't do it that way because I'm like, these people are a part of the institution, the psychologists from CBCR or whatever the prison. So they have their job, I have my job. And I want to see what they've written in their report before I write my report. But like I said, we all do this work differently because essentially there's not a field of study in this work to do it. But the controlling offense, sorry, we get off track because there's so much you can cover.
That's okay. That's okay.
The controlling offense. So let's say if like someone's in there for murder, like essentially just think of it as like their main offense. What happens is if someone once they get inside, if they commit, say, a second offense, then that could prohibit them from being able to get a Franklin.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's usually like what it is, just like your main offense that you've committed, like the big one.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And if you would allow, Jack, just a quick follow-up. I wanted to mention to you, Rhonda, that several years ago, I attended a National Association of Forensic Social Workers conference in Atlanta. And one of the things that always was interesting to me is that mitigation work is very, very involved. And I remember someone telling their story about working with a particular client, how long they were engaged, and just how emotionally attached they were to the case. So I was wondering if you could speak to maintaining boundaries and objectivity, but of course appealing for the client, because I just would imagine it's really difficult in that role because it's such hard work. You don't lose sight of the conviction or the offense, but what you need to do is so emotional. But I just wonder about those boundaries and how do you get that work done and hold on to yourself?
I always tell like clients, I'm like, I'm the most professional but unprofessional person you will like ever meet. Because it's like at the forefront of like, I think just for me as an individual, it's like the humanity of, like, I understand, like, we didn't all start out in life with like, the first chance. Like some of us were born to like, two parents, and we didn't think about all these like, things that everyone else essentially has had to go through in life. And so, but in mitigation, yeah, you are connected, especially on death penalty cases. Like we have to go like 3 generations back. Like I take people's like children to visit them. I've watched like my guy that I've had for 9 years. Like I first came on the case and his son was just only a couple years old. And, now he's almost like 10 years old. And so I've watched him grow. He's watched, my clients seen like me go through like my daughter moving off to New York to go to college. And you know what I mean? Like, the passing of like family members, like, I've had guys where I've had to go deliver the news that their like parent has died. So in essence, it's like, yeah, like these individuals like become your friends, which is so looked down on in the system to have that humanity. I think, especially for me, like I am a 5'11" and a half tall, like, thin blonde, and like, it's always like this, like, oh, well, you must have feelings for your client, like that's how the correctional system. And it's like, no, I'm just this is a person and I am a person. And, that's how you have to like look at it. So when you're talking about like, even just like making sure that you decompress, I think we just all have our ways in which we do that. Like for me, it's like, I watch a lot of like television. I have this puppy now who drives me crazy. But yeah, it's just, and I also like, there's people that are like, that do the work that I'm like friends with, but it's like, I keep like my core group of like, like it's like my daughter and like my closest friend, like those are like the 2 individuals that I kind of like, my poor daughter and my poor friend, but I talk to the most about like my work. Yeah, and so I think that there is, but I I don't think you can do this work without being impacted by it. And I think that that's why a lot of people just really put that professional wall up, like, like, okay, I'm Miss Swenson and I'm here for this and I'm here for that. And I'm like, no, my name is Rhonda, call me Rhonda. You know what I mean? Like, what do you need? Do you need books? Do you need this? Reaching out like to the family, family. I'm a late night person, so I'm usually up till like 3:30 in the morning. So I tell clients like, call, text if you need to talk. I tell like their families like the same thing. Like, I'm here for you and I'm going to continue to be here for you. And especially in the like forefront, like I tell clients and their families like, yeah, if they got a sentence that where they're going to be in there, I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. If I see a new law that's going to benefit you, I'm going to send you that information. If I'm not on your case anymore for whatever the reason may be, then I'm still going to be there for you. And so that's a part of the not re-traumatizing people. Is like, you don't want, I think when you do this work, we do a disservice when we're like, okay, I wrote this report, have a nice life, I'll see you later. Because that's what so many individuals are used to, is people disappearing. And so I really, really try my best to, I'm here for whatever capacity you need me for.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that. That was incredibly helpful, because it's emotional work. It's emotional work.
And it does affect you. Like I was just talking to like a friend the other day, and she lost, a juvenile transfer. And so, I'm like, are you, wait, how are you doing? Like, do you need anything? Because we all like kind of do that for each other, because yeah, like here's the thing. So if I get like a bad, like, if the client gets a bad sentence, I'm like crying for days. I can't like really like focus on other stuff, because you're devastated, because you take it personal. You're like, second guessing yourself, like, what could I have done different? What could I have said different? Which I think kind of brings up an important issue. Like, in California, everybody thinks like, oh, California is just liberal, but our whole Central Valley is very, very conservative. And so the sentences are just all across the board. Like in California, we just, in San Francisco, we had a progressive DA, which they ended up voting out. And so now they have someone who's very, very conservative, and she's just kind of has brought back juvenile transfers and, tough on cases. And then it was across the bridge, like a 15, 20-minute drive. We had someone who was like really conservative in the office for 20-something years. And now we have a new progressive district attorney there who's like, I don't want, them to do enhancements. I'm not going to pursue like the death penalty. I'm not going to do juvenile transfers. So things can change so quickly. And a part of that big change that you want to do is getting district attorneys in there. Like that's how you start to change the system too.
Absolutely. And then, Karen, thank you so much for that. And then I was going to say, I just realized that we never quite touched on it. But so what was your exact transition into kind of the mitigation specialist? Because in 2006, so I misread it. It looks like since 1999, you've had your own, what was the name of it? But basically since 1999, then you transitioned in 2006 to actually being within this particular field.
Yeah. So when I was getting my bachelor's degree, I remember like my advisor being like, oh, you should pursue like social work. And I'm like, heck no. I'm like, so me, my mom, and my stepdad, because I was a single mom, raised my daughter just completely by myself. Her dad signed over his parental rights. So for me, like I always took jobs where I could like really essentially work from home. And so like I said, started out as a paralegal working on like serious felonies and stuff. And then my family, we were doing foster care. And we always at one time had like 4 teenage boys. And we started that like I was in my early 20s. And so in 2006, the place that I took cases for as a paralegal, we had gotten a grant to do, not even a grant, we got the contract to do juvenile dependency in another county. And so my boss was like, hey, you know how to do this stuff, go over there and open up this office. And so then when, I went over there in 2006 to open up the office and got to talking to the attorneys, they were more so like, hey, we do this like, different type of, they did criminal cases, their dependency cases. They were like, start working on our cases. So that's how like the transition essentially was made for me. But I did actually do a couple of years of law school. And the first couple of years of law school, the first day of law school was September 11th, which I was like, I mean, why do I have to be here? Like, my daughter was only a couple years old. I was like, I feel like I should be home. But, I stuck it out for 2 years and I had a death penalty case my first year. And that I was doing that. And so I was like, you didn't spend enough time with clients. That I was like, I don't want to do this work and be giving people these horrible sentences and just not really know like anything about this person. Like, and so for me, I was like, I'm going to go back and get my master's degree. And then, pursue a different like avenue. So that's kind of where that ended up happening. And that was way earlier than 2006, but.
Absolutely. And I was curious too, just overall, as you continue to work with people over these last couple of years, or what would be, do you have any particular stories that, about, obviously we've learned about the constant re-entry into jail or prison and how that process needs to be stopped. And that's a whole nother conversation, but I was curious if you have any general like success stories or any stories that you like to speak on about times where you felt that the process really worked out for an individual.
Here's the thing is that no matter what the sentence is, I think the process always works out for the individual because you are you're allowing that individual to be seen, and so it's like when they read and see like what you wrote, like the thank yous that you get, like, I mean, I always think like, I do this work for them, but at the end of the day, like I also do this work for myself. Like there's nothing like more rewarding than to like make people start to feel like whole, because you have to think about like how all of these like, individuals that end up in the system, they internalize all of these like horrible things that people say about them. And so, when you come in there, like when I do my work, I don't really talk to my clients about the crime. So I talk to my clients about, everything that was happening up until that day. I might bring in that day if they had like older co-defendants, because that makes a difference. And then I talk about like what's happening after the crime. So, the thing about it is we focus so much on the crime that we forget that like, if all of these other things hadn't been happening in this person's life, then they wouldn't have committed this crime. So whether that be mental illness, whether that be poverty, whether that be like, not having any kind of support system, struggling in school, there's just all of these other factors that come into play, the community violence, like how do you function? I mean, I had one guy where I'll tell my clients like, do you have anybody that that has like lost their life to gun violence? And he was like, sorry, he was like, yeah, let me make you a list. And I was like, okay, he's got to make a list. So he, on a standard piece of paper with the lines, wrote 2 rows, and then also on the back. And I literally like looked up every single one of these persons. So I was like, this can't be like, like this is a lot. He like grew up in Oakland. And even after like his case, like it's still coming in more and more and more. So it's like he knew at that time, at least like 50 something individuals. Like he was the only one left out of like all his childhood friends that hadn't died due to gun violence. How do you sit in class and function every day? How do you do anything and function every day? So I think when we start to like bring those stories to light and to them and to the courts, and they start to realize like, okay, I'm not a bad person. Like, yeah, I did this bad thing, but I'm not a bad person. And so, I feel like every client, like there's so much that I take away like from them. And I think hopefully there's so much that they take away from, me and my work.
I'm sure there is. I mean, I can't imagine that kind of internalization and that struggle within that. It's a life that you can't imagine living if you haven't, right? And I'm curious with individuals that possibly you've seen turn down a proper path or whatever it may be, what is that flip that occurs, and I'm sure that's different in every single person, but obviously someone like you as a support system or what is it, the foundations that allows people to kind of build on and possibly see that new path, or, believe in themselves and understand the fact that, hey, it's a process that the way I was brought up, not, I may have did a bad thing, but I'm not a bad person.
I mean, I think support system for one, like that's the main thing, like having at least, I mean, and we know this from research, like having at least one person throughout your life that like, and it doesn't have to be the same consistent person, but you need to have at least one person from all points in your life that you can point to be like, I had someone and they were there. But like, there's also that like moment that like, your brain does fully develop and you are starting to like think about the things. That's why like incarceration and excessive sentences like are just not how we should be doing it, because it's like after like 10, 15 years of incarceration, that someone has had that light bulb moment, like, I don't want to be in this anymore and I'm going to change. So it's like the programming, that they get inside helps. And I think the program that really helps is when you have volunteers from the outside that come in and once again treat people like human beings. And so they once again feel seen and they're like, I want to be better for this person. Like I think even with my client that like, I've had for like almost, 9 years or whatever, like for him, a lot of it was age, but I think a lot of it was like knowing when he would do something, like seeing the impact that I think like it has on me. Like I go in there and if somebody's like, gotten what we call like a 115 in prison or they get a write-up in jail or whatever, like I'm crying. Like, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, we don't want to go backwards. We want to get you out of here. Like, so I think like when people start to see like, this is having this impact, or they're seeing like, like guys having their moms, like, pass away and getting up there in age, or seeing their kids grow. Like, I think that shift like starts to happen. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want out of this place. Education is big too. Like, sending people books, finding their passion inside. Those are also like going to be like the big shifts. Like once people realize like, I don't have to do this anymore. I can, there is this possibility. So a big part of that too is like telling clients like, guys inside are like writing books and they're getting outside and they're starting nonprofits, or they're connecting to colleges and they're teaching like from, inside prison, getting them to understand that like just because you're in here, that doesn't mean that there's not like a whole world for you outside that you could be a part of, but you got to do the work. That's a big thing, is you have to do that work.
And that was one thing that I was kind of shocked by, is that, and maybe I'm understanding wrong, but education, I think everybody believes that's a huge part of it, as well as the other things that you mentioned. And so when they're in, kind of touching back on, we're talking about jail versus prison, are they able to kind of work towards any kind of education at that stage?
So in jail, a lot of times you can do correspondence courses, but it's hard because in order to do a lot of the correspondence courses, then individuals from like the college that you are doing the courses with have to come in and administer tests. And so if you have a jail that's like, I'm not letting these people come in and administer tests, then they can't really do the college courses. Now in prison, so in California, we just passed where everyone incarcerated is eligible for Pell Grants now. And we have what's called like Project Rebound, which is where I think all the California state universities now have it, where individuals who are like formerly incarcerated can like transition and, have like support and all of this stuff to be like at college. And a lot of them are starting the classes while they're in prison, and then they transition, to like let's say they get their bachelor's in jail or in prison and they haven't finished it yet, then they'll transition over to like a college and finish the stuff up there and have the support system that they need, which is amazing. But yeah, like education is key, but also education's not for everyone. So like having the vocational skills where, like welding is a big thing. Welding's also a big thing that the parole board loves. So it's like people being able to get like, or, auto mechanics, or, being a barber. Like there's like this great organization where it's like started by individuals like working with formerly incarcerated to be barbers and getting their license. So there's like all these different avenues that people can pursue. So for me, like education is about like finding what you are passionate about and then helping them. So like I have one guy who's like, I really want to be like a certified like public accountant, CPA. So I was like, and he's like, when I get out, and I'm like, well, why start when you get out? Like I was like, let's just get you the books now and you can start studying. So when you do get out, you already know the material and you can just go take the test and do whatever the easy stuff. But I was like, you know, for the most part, you're sitting here day in and day out. Like, let's just start the process now. So for me, a big part of like the education is finding out like what interests your client, and then, you know, going forward with how you can help them get that now, that education.
Absolutely. And I was curious too, and I'm sure that, you know, once we'll have some other people in a couple of minutes here ask a couple of different questions, but speaking to your occupation as a whole, you know, and you mentioned that there wasn't really a path carved out for this, and there still might not be, and the need for people and all these things that you mentioned kind of previously before stepping on. I was curious if you would rather, you know, if you want to talk about the future, where you desire to go, or what your just opinion about the field is itself, if you can kind of speak on what you see the direction of the field and kind of being involved in it.
Yeah. So I think the field is growing, and the field is growing faster than we have people, which is just really, really sad, because like I said, you know, like I'm going to be 50 this year. So it's like, there really, really wasn't, you know, even though like I was a sociology major, you know, a lot of those classes are the same as if you were doing social work, or the same as if you were doing criminal justice. So there wasn't a class that taught you about any of this stuff. There wasn't a class in, say, like law school that taught you about any of this stuff. And so now, even though we do have like great organizations who are, you know, trying to like, so we have, you know, the National Association of Public Defense, NAPD. So they do a lot of work. National Organization of Forensic Social Work. They do, you know, some trainings and stuff on it. But, you know, a lot of times too, what we're kind of running into problems with is that once someone has a degree, they think like, oh, I already know everything. I don't need to take any training. And it's like, no, yeah, you have a degree, but you don't have a degree in exactly how to do this work. So like, there were so many of us that I think were like self-taught. Like we took, if like you look at my like resume CV, I do extensive training, and I do extensive training all the time, because you're always going to be able to learn something from someone else. And so I think, you know, no matter what profession you're in, like if you see like a pathway or whatever, like figure it out yourself. Because like I said, if you have the heart to do this work, then you should do it. And I think, you know, because California is doing this, I think all these other states will follow. And, you know, most of the states do have social workers in public defenders' offices, but a lot of times how the social workers are utilized in when they first came into that space was more so that, okay, we need licensed clinical social workers so that we can do these like psychosocial reports to give to the courts for like, you know, mental health type purposes or diversion programs and stuff like that. So there's still a large group of those like individuals where, yes, there's a need for that. But because of all with laws changing nationwide about how we, you know, giving people 25 to life gun enhancements, 25 to life gang enhancements, all the new second look laws that are coming out, you need individuals who can look at the individuals and write about that. Because like I said, the more that we humanize the individual, the better chance we're going to have of getting them like out of prison and decarcerating, you know, our mass incarceration. So yeah, hopefully people will pursue this work, because like I said, there really is a need. I can't express that enough. Like it's like gotten to the point where I've had to like at some points be like, I can't take on a new case for like, you know, 8 months. You know, and everyone carries a different caseload. And so, you know, some people might be like, I only have 10 cases. Some of us might be like, we have 50 cases, 60 cases or whatever. And so if you're in an office, there's a lot of support system, which is great. And you also get like a regular check every like week or two. Whereas like if we're doing this work as independent contractor, sometimes you might go 6 months without being paid. You might be forefronting all of that up front. So it's like, you really have to like, from that standpoint, love the work, you know what I mean? But yeah, I think it's definitely something that we can pursue, and I really, really hope that colleges start to like offer it as a class. I think that's going to be huge, and something that I think national organizations need to be doing is saying we're going to have, you know, a forensic social work mitigation type class and be teaching individuals how to do this work.
Absolutely. And I think in a minute here, we're going to kind of reintroduce Elaine, but Karen, do you have any kind of, obviously we'll have some time after this, but you have anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to really thank you, Rhonda, because when we asked about the success story, I loved that you didn't focus success just on like someone's release, but it's the impact of your work and the fact that your goal or an indirect goal of yours or an outcome is that, you know, clients are humanized in a way that maybe they had not previously experienced. And so I thank you for that emphasis, because sometimes we think success is, oh, you just get released and you go on a life is great, but it is a change and a shift in how they see themselves. So I definitely thank you for your work. And I know there are other questions coming. If you could give just a little thought to, if we have some people watching and maybe they have a family member who has one of these kind of cases that you would work on, say they don't have a mitigation specialist on the case, how would someone petition for one? How do they go about requesting that for their family member or friends, you know, case if they think it could be beneficial?
You know, a lot of things like people could do up front, and there's like, you know, California has like some organizations now where like they're helping like families do it, to especially for like resentencing type stuff. A lot of the, sorry, my dog is, a lot of the work is, you know, the pictures, like getting the pictures. If you have records, you know, getting the school records, like for instance, if you have a family member who is just at the beginning of their case, and you know it hasn't been years since they graduated from school and stuff, go down immediately and ask for their cumulative educational file, so that like, you know, those records are there. You know, in California, for like say a Franklin, which is the YOP, then they someone can just call up like the public defender's office or the courts and be like, I qualify for a Franklin and get it. And so like even for the Franklin, because it's not a resentencing hearing, but a lot of times like we might get a client, and so like when I go see the client, I'll be like, okay, well, you don't have parole board for say like 15 years, but let's see if you qualify for resentencing. And so then I can like work on that like part immediately. So like for family members, they are key to doing this work. And so if you're like a family member and you're like, oh, well, you know, a lot of stuff's happened, I don't have pictures or whatever, call up every single person that you know that might have a picture of your like loved one. You know what I mean? There's got to be pictures out there. There has to be something. So like getting, you know, getting out there and doing like the things that you can do, so that like even when you're going to talk to say an attorney or whatever about getting some kind of mitigation, being able to take them and say, look, this is what I started, you know, part of like the intergenerational trauma, like, you know, I always talk about like the guys inside are doing that trauma work, but the families outside in your support system is not doing that trauma work. They are not doing like mental health stuff. Like, let's just be honest. So if like say a parent, be honest about everything that was going on in your life. If your child was in like taken by like CPS, and you know there's social service records and stuff, go get those social service records. Write down if you knew that like you guys were moving around, if you were homeless at times, like tell the story from your perspective so that you could go and give that information, say, look, you know, this is everything that is going on in, you know, my loved one's life or whatever. So I think that that's how you can do it. And like I said, I'm not too familiar about like what happens in every other state. I really can only talk about California because that's, I mean, I do so much work in California that I don't really try to do any other state. But yeah, and if there's not an organization, start an organization. Like there's great places that you can look at that are doing the work. Like we have some great works that do like, you know, videos like for individuals to, you know, do stuff like that. Like I said, I try to do like the whole PowerPoint thing, make a PowerPoint of like your loved one. And find people in your state that are doing the work and, you know, reach out to them and talk to them, because that's the thing. Like, we do want to help people. So it's like, even though we can't particularly work on your case, if you ask me questions, I'm going to help you, and send you materials that will help you.
Absolutely. Elaine, I think you might be muted.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, we've got to move into our Q&A because we've got about 5 or 6 questions on Facebook that we got to get to. So, but listen, the commentary on Facebook is really heating up. This is a really interesting topic. And Jack, you're killing it with the questions. Karen, you're killing it with the questions. People are really asking about this field because a lot of folks didn't know about it. And we got some plans though. So we got some plans. All right. Social media team, come on and join us back, please. We've got about 5 or 6 questions as I've counted out here on Facebook. All right, this is our Q&A segment. Typically, we start our Q&A at about 10:45, but the conversation has been so robust, we're a little bit late getting started, but nonetheless, we're going to get to all of the questions, okay? All right, who wants to go first? We're posing the questions to Miss Rhonda. You're muted, Erica. Erica, you're muted, sweetheart.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There was no questions on Instagram, but I know there's several questions on Facebook.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we had quite a few questions. The first one was, where are the greatest needs for mitigation services, specific population types? Example, like adults, juvenile, etc.
I would say both. Like, I don't think that there's like a greater need one way or the other. Like, sadly, like there's people that are like, oh, like we're having a big issue here now in California where like people are like, oh, I won't work juvenile transfers because I don't want to testify. The thing about it is, if you work on a case, you could be called to testify. So you should take any kind of case. I personally, like, juveniles are like my heart. So, you know, if we can stop them from getting into, you know, the adult prison system, we want to do that. And I think where it's, you know, where we can make a huge impact, but there's a need across the board because, like I said, with all of the, especially the second look type laws and stuff that are being passed, you have to just, you need mitigation to start telling these individual stories.
I'm glad you brought that up. If I may interject for 1 second, the Sentencing Project in DC released an announcement this week about their new Second Look network. And we're trying to become a part of that network as well, at least from a media and communications end. And so do you all do much work with the Sentencing Project in DC?
No, I'm actually like on the advisory board for what it's called PJDC, the Pacific Juvenile Defender Center here. And so we do juvenile work. And so we do counteract a lot with like the adult center, like we're a part of their nationwide network. But like with the sentencing project, I don't know if people are familiar, but they just recently came out with a report where they said sentences should essentially be capped at 20 years. You know, in California, we're making it so for the resentencing, people are getting a second look after 15 years. And so when you look at like all these excessive sentences that we're giving individuals, all of the research shows us it's not necessary. And so I want people to start thinking about, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, but exactly what is the purpose of incarceration? You know, and I won't bring in like, you know, all the racism and all, you know, that part of it, but that is a huge part of it, and the money. Like, let's, you know, like, and so we're not incarcerating people to protect society because research shows that's not contributing to our safety.
Right.
So let's just, we got to be honest about that.
All right, Fazana, next question.
Next question is, how often do criminal defense attorneys secure the services of mitigation specialists to aid in the representation of their clients?
So in a capital case, you have to have a mitigation specialist. It's, you know, you don't have a choice. Like, you have to have a mitigation specialist, you know, because the field is relatively new. per se, which seems crazy because a lot of us have been doing it for so many years, but it is new. And so there is a lot of pushback, and attorneys feel like, well, I've kind of been doing this work a little bit myself, so I don't need, that, and that control issue of like wanting to control their cases. But like, even just this last week, I was on like a Zoom with a new like conflicts panel that has like started a social work group, component. And so, it was with social workers and attorneys. And so getting them to understand that like, we essentially are trained in, ACEs, childhood adverse experiences, community adverse experiences, trauma, and so we bring a different level that you weren't trained in. So trust our expertise to be a part of the team, because we want to help the client. And so older attorneys are still like, wait, I don't really get what this is. Like the newer ones are like really on board, and then you have like the ones that are like in the middle that are like, but it is growing. And I think when they're in the offices, it's very easy to get them. But like when we're independent contractors, like we're essentially hired as like experts to do the work. And so, I kind of just all come from like different capacities, but I'd say defense attorneys are getting on board, just maybe not as quickly as I would like.
Great. Next, Fazana.
The next question we have here is, what does a typical day of a mitigation specialist look like?
Is no typical day. Your morning could start out with like 20 texts from like a mom that's like, I haven't heard from my son in 2 weeks and I'm worried, can you find anything out? Or you could start out, you like, if I have concrete meetings planned, then of course I kind of like know what my day is going to be like. If say now because of COVID, like we can like video visits with clients. Sometimes a lot of my day is I might travel, say, 3 hours one way to go see a client at a jail or prison. And I get there and they're like, oh, you can't visit today. And so then I get in my car and I drive 3.5 hours home. And by the time I get home, I'm like, oh, I don't want to work. You know what I mean? So it's like there's no typical day. And I think that's a part. There's probably more so a typical day if you are in a 9 to 5 office setting. So there's people that do this work and they're like, I come into the office at 9 o'clock and I leave at 5 o'clock and I turn my work phone off and I don't do any of that. My thing is like, I, usually have my ringer off, because if I'm not like doing something, I'm writing. So that's why I say it's best to send me a text or an email. But I don't know, because I don't do this. I don't think, for me personally, I don't think this is a 9 to 5 job. I think this is a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week job, because that's how people are. People need help 24/7. And so in order, I think, to like a big thing, not re-traumatize people, and you try to be present as much as you possibly can.
Right. Fazana.
Yeah, another great question we have is, are mitigation specialists only called for juvenile transfers and death penalty cases, or can anyone call on them for aid with their current case or trial?
So I want to say that there's like two different, so there's mitigation specialists, and then there's like forensic social workers, master social workers, like social workers. We just call them like forensic social workers. So there's a little bit of two different avenues. So a forensic social worker in, say, like, a traditional on a criminal case could be used at any setting. So they might be used to, talk about like mental health diversion and why this client should go to like, alcohol, like a rehab versus going to jail. So they might be called to write that kind of report. They might be called to say, do a resentencing petition to talk about like the transformation about this individual in their lives. You might just not even maybe necessarily meet the client, like they just maybe want you to review some records. Like there's so many different avenues that it's kind of like, it would just take me, I feel like, forever to kind of speak on. But no, you could use them in any capacity, and you should use them in any capacity.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. Fazana.
Yes, there's two more questions. So, how new is the work of a mitigation specialist in the justice system?
It's not new. So it's new in one sense that they're being utilized in all these different ways. It's not new when it comes to like death penalty cases, because that's where, it started. But it's new to use mitigation specialists in all of the ways in which we are utilized now, which, like I'm saying, so like, it kind of went from death penalty to juvenile transfers. Now it's the Franklin cases, Miller cases, which is like, not being able to try like 14, 15-year-olds as adults. And then you have, like I said, all of these like resentencing avenues, which is like the enhancements. So in California, in order to, when you give people enhancements, you also have to take into consideration childhood trauma now. So, we're used in that capacity to talk about it. So yeah, it's not new in that sense. I would say even a lot of social work programs, San Francisco Public Defender's Office has had it for decades. They were using social workers, but the majority of offices, I'm going to say, are probably within the last like 5 to 10 years. And so when you look at like, say, our educational system, as far as like colleges and stuff, we haven't caught up with the fact that like, this is a real field that people need to be pursuing. And we have to train individuals to do this work because like I started a social work program at a public defender's office, and we we did this kind of thing where like half the budget was coming from social services and then half the budget was coming from the public defender's office. So what happened is I had these 2 social workers who had been in the field for years, but literally knew nothing about the criminal justice system at all. So it's like I had to like train them about like the criminal justice system, because if you don't know about the criminal justice system, then you're not going to know the impact that it's having on your clients. And so, yeah, our education field really needs to like catch up with the fact that this is like a real job that people need to be pursuing, and that there's a need for you. Like you're going to be able to find work.
And before we get to the last question, it has to do with whether or not there's a pathway in the education field for this work. And I want to ask you a question. What is your opinion about, or do you think that mitigation services should be called for before certifying juveniles as adults?
Yes, most definitely. I mean, I think that mitigation services should be used at the forefront of every single case.
Okay.
Like there's nothing worse to me than when an attorney calls me after they've lost a case and they're like, oh, now my client's going to be sentenced and I don't know what to do. And then I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, why are you just calling me now? And it's even worse when that happens, when you start digging in and you know the horrible life that this client has had. And you're like, had you put this on, then your client would not have been convicted. Because here's the thing that I think about too, is that I want a jury, before they convict someone, to know who that individual is. And if you, after that fact, if you are okay with sentencing this individual to life, then that's on you to live with. But I'm like, I know for me personally, there has to be at least like one person on a jury that would be like, I just can't do it. Like, I can't sentence this person to life, which I think is, another part that's wrong. Sorry, I get so off track. Another part that's wrong with our system is you don't get to know what sentence someone is getting,
Right.
when you convict them of a crime, because I think so many people would rethink, the sentences that they're giving. But yeah, definitely mitigation needs to be at the forefront. Like you need to hire that person from day one and say, look, I want to help this individual. Can you look at it? It should be on every single case. If it was up to me, it would be nationwide, that, every single case you have a forensic social worker, or you have you're using mitigation. Okay,
excellent. For Zana, last question.
Yeah, last question, like Elaine mentioned, is there a pathway for a mitigation specialist in the education field?
So like I said, there's always different thoughts like people have. So like I said, there's the whole thought that like this has to be someone who comes from a social work background, because people think we need licensed clinical social workers because we need these psychosocial reports done, all of this stuff. That is not the case. Like I said, for me, I think sociology really like opens the door because you're looking at society as a whole. So
Mhm.
you're looking at like the individual, and the effects that like society has on, the impact that it has on people's lives. So
Mhm.
I think that that's always a good avenue to pursue. Plus, like I said, a lot of your classes are going to be social work and criminal justice, and you can really cater to what you need. And I think if it's something that you're interested in, then find your own path in like education. Like, there's a lot of, like, a big part of our job is writing, like so much writing. And for me, it's like, creative writing stories, like, taking
Mhm.
classes on like nonfiction and all that stuff. Like you
Storytelling.
have to, yeah, I mean, that's what we are. We are actual like storytellers. And
Right.
so, and if you're doing this work in the way in which it should be done, then I think that you are a storyteller.
Right.
If you're doing this work and you're coming in, and this is the part that I have where it's like when people think like, the clinical component part is good. They read enough clinical stuff, and there are different experts that can like hire. And if you're hiring someone for that part, that's good. But the part that we want to really, really express to people that I feel like is lost is that our part is to humanize, which seems so insane that we have to humanize a human, but our job is to humanize that client. And the way in which we do that is to tell stories, whether that be through, an actual like, report, or whether that be through, PowerPoints or a movie, or, like people connect to stories. And so
Mhm.
we want people to connect to our client. So we have to be able to tell stories.
So Rhonda, given the fact that I kind of know the person who asked that question, I want to put it, I think, in the context in which she meant to ask the question. That was an excellent feedback you just gave, because that was needed. This person is a former teacher in an alternative school. And so in the context of the K through 12 environment, where we know we have a lot of the school to prison pipeline issues and kids' unwarranted interactions with school resource officers, do you think mitigation specialists would also be beneficial in that setting as well?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about like, a part of like, I really look at like in my work is like education. And so, you're really looking at like where the school failed this individual. Like, we're not teaching, like, I think after COVID, it really opened a lot of people's eyes to like trauma and what that looked like and everything. So
Mhm.
like now a lot of schools are thinking about that and thinking about, so even like, schools were introducing ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. But at the same time, they weren't introducing the adverse community experiences. Like if you're dealing with racism and poverty and violence and, all these other aspects of like your neighborhood you don't have control of, you have to be talking to that individual. So it's like, when we talk about like the school to prison pipeline, so I actually, like when I was getting my teaching credential, I taught at a school that was like run by an actual like group home. And so all of my kids were like, kids that were either in foster care or they were in like the juvenile justice system, all this stuff. So that first day I came to like teach, there were like kids sleeping on the floor, like, and I'm like, what is going on here? Like, I was like, if my school comes to like actually like see what they're gonna do, and they're gonna be like, oh gosh, So I asked the teacher first, like, what the heck is going on? Why don't these kids have real books? But then I asked the kids, what do you need? What's it going to take for you to get engaged in this class?
Mhm.
And they said to me, one kid raised his hand and he was like, it's cold and I would like to have hot chocolate. And I said, okay. So I went and got a coffee machine, got hot chocolate packets. That next day, if you wanted hot chocolate, you just went and made hot chocolate. You know what I mean? So it's like, we need to be talking to kids and figuring out what's going on. And the thing about it is teachers aren't trained in that. Quit expecting people to do every job possible. We have people that could do this work. So, for the individual that's teaching in a school like that, like, yeah, you need to know what's going on with that kid. You need to know that maybe they were responsible for, getting their 5 siblings ready for school in the morning. And that's why they're late every single day.
There we go.
Yeah. And so there's all of these like things that we could all be doing to help each other to just make our community better and safer and to, keep kids out of the system that, yeah, you definitely need, every school should have a social worker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, we're about 10 minutes over.
Sorry.
But this is great, and the questions were coming in, and there's so many different ways that we can expand the capacity of this work in different settings because it's needed, as you said. And I just think that there's a lot of room here, and my mind is already spinning on ways to address these issues. Rhonda, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Jack to close us out. I want to first thank the social media team for fielding the questions and monitoring social media. I want to also thank Karen for her input from clinical perspective, and Rhonda, you'll be back. You'll be back. Okay, Jack, turn it back over to Jack.
Yeah, Ron, I mean, I appreciate it completely for everything that has been explored. I hope that you have created a couple of people in this chat or that are watching that want to kind of go into this field. Overall, yeah, that's kind of all I have. And I really, really appreciate you stepping on here. I know that everybody else does. And like Elaine said, Karen, thank you for all of the fantastic questions as well. And I'm sure that you will be back. And hopefully the puppy is here as well. And no, I just really want to thank you for your time. And I want to give a shout out to Kwanda as well, who, while this was my show, Kwanda did a lot of all the communication between you and her. So I appreciate her. And that is all I have for right now. So I really, really appreciate it for you hopping on this week of the Justice Beat Talk Show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, our listening and viewer audience. We appreciate so much your support, and we will be back on next Saturday for another episode of the Justice Beat Talk Show. Take care. God bless, and have a wonderful weekend.